Yes, my mission is here to represent young people into the Commission on the Status of Women from the Netherlands. So we have a lot of different representatives in the delegation, and I am here to actually represent all the input we gathered from consultations with young people from the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So that is the Netherlands, but also, for example, from Aruba. And here I will be advocating for our needs, but also our demands.
I think it's important for us to always remember that the work that we're doing is creating change, and that we need to be in dialogue with each other, and we also need to not only be in dialogue but action things. And so we have to assess what are the challenges that men, women, trans people, non-binary people experience every single day, what are the mechanisms that are needed to change it, and how can we actively be a part of that, whether it's through conversation, whether it's through sharing a TikTok post, whether it is through being in community with like-minded people, challenging the state. All of these actions are very important towards our larger goal of gender transformation across the world.
Today we discussed, the findings from implementing the Gender Transformative Accelerator across at least 15 countries, where we found that despite all the efforts of having gender transformative designs of programs, in practice there is still a huge gap in terms of making sure that the conversations around masculinities, the engagement of boys and young men particularly through intergenerational dialogue is really happening. What we have seen is that most programs are really interacting with men as adults, but also as gatekeepers or power holders, but not necessarily shaking the power dynamics that are affecting young people or giving young people the space for transforming.
We are trying to add within the broader conversation around feminist vision for equality is to talk about how do we meaningfully and accountably engage boys and men in the conversation in the struggle for gender justice. So we'll today spend some time to talk about boys, young men, and what have we been learning about working with them in the grassroots level, but also what has that meant within the broader feminist space and the vision that is there with that we have set. And talking about more of an intergenerational approach to look at what does it mean and how has it really contributed or not contributed, right? So be an open and honest conversation on what we are observing. And I think very quickly to give you a background about who MenEngage is. For those of you who know, it might be repetitive, apologies for that. So MenEngage is a global social change network with members. When we say members, it's both individual and organizations that are doing work around women's rights, LGBTIQ rights, SRHR, economies of care, which is called unpaid care work as well, militarization and masculinities, and youth leadership. And youth leadership for us is not only a priority topic, but it cuts across everything we do as an alliance.
It has been really interesting on the aspect of being pragmatic that we were mentioning before. And I mean, moving a bit away from the topic that I mentioned during the presentation, but right now, for example, in the situation in Ecuador, where I come from, most of the gangs are not led, but they have a huge membership of young men and adolescents who are recruited by these gangs as a part of life, a career actually. I was looking the other day at a report from Mexico that the cartels are the fifth leading employer in the country. So if joining a gang becomes an opportunity for you to succeed in life, I think that brings a lot of questions about being pragmatic about the work that we're doing. So instead of saying, yes, I mean, we are developing this new framework or whatever, I think that landing these sort of things at the community level are very important.
So I think this has been really good also, for example, in the Dutch delegation in general, they are very working closely with civil society. So now for the first year, it's also with youth. And I think this is very important for more delegations to do because you keep them accountable not only before, during the conference and after. So yeah, we have the opportunity to, for example, give our insights, give our priorities, and then after you can say, okay, but what did you do with them? So for example, one of the priorities that also got in there is, for example, engaging men and boys. So I think this is something that is very promising practice that I would really love to see for more delegations. And for example, one of the things that a lot of young people also said to us is that we have to all get back to the classroom, but also how the curriculum should also go a lot beyond making yourself profitable, and exactly like you said, make sure you're feminist informed. So for example, next to this, I'm also a teacher and I teach Dutch, and then we always do it from like a framework of political engagement. So I was teaching the word feminist, and then I said, oh, are you a feminist? And then we were in a class with a lot of young boys, and then they said, oh no. And I was like, what? What do you mean? You don't think we should have equal rights? And then I said, oh yes, of course. But then I said, so you are a feminist, no? So it really showed, and then we had more conversation about it, and then the next time when they came to the classroom, they said, Miss, I have been reading more about it, and actually, I really like this. I really like this concept. Can we talk more about it? And this for me showed just so much about how it was just such a stigma that it's really important to overcome.
And I want to share with you what we have been doing through what we call the Gender Transformative Accelerator. Can you repeat that? Gender Transformative Accelerator. I just wanted to make sure that you are here, because I can imagine that some of you are jet lagged. What is the Gender Transformative Accelerator for us? It's actually a tool that we created, that we put together, trying to provide a response to all of these elements of transforming the theory into practical tools. And beyond the concept of gender transformative programming, what we did was we put together a tool that can go from the collective gender analysis to an identification of different priorities at the country level, and putting together an action plan where countries, when I'm saying countries, that includes the UN, the government, civil society, all the people that could be involved, can really put together and move in a way that they can move their programs from, let's say, a more gender-sensitive stage to a more responsive and ideally at some point more transformative. It's not like a linear rule, we know that. It's actually very complex. But the same process is really moving the people from assessing their own programs to then identify what they can really do with the resources they have, what can really move the needle. And just by doing that, you can actually see also certain outcomes, right? Like getting clarity, for example. And one of the dimensions of this Gender Transformative Accelerator tool is the whole conversation around masculinities. But what we have found in practice, that even when we are discussing about the different programmatic tools, the different programmatic approaches, including, for example, what do we mean by these men and boys? In practice, when we are really approaching the countries and going through the gender assessments collectively, what is happening in the field is really conversations about adult men. And as gatekeepers or power holders. Which means that, yes, for example, we know that we require alliances to have the capacity to implement our programs, but is that enough? Not really, right? We know that. But can we really do something, for example, for voice programming? It's not that easy. Do we have the resources? Not always. So we have a big challenge in terms of translating what we say in terms of design and evidence and what can really take place in the practice.
I want to speak about some of the work that some amazing feminist activists have done. I'm a part of the Caribbean Male Action Network, and what we have done, which I think is very important work, is we've done a lot of trainings within the Caribbean region in places like Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, to deal with how we can retrain men to learn about the language of gender and sexuality. We also do things that challenge the myths of gender within community and how we think about gender roles within the Caribbean, especially since our region is very, very religious. And we also work with men and boys in teaching them ways to hold men accountable so that women don't have to be exhausted all of the time doing this kind of work. We've also had the Caribbean Man Pledge. This is received across schools and places across the region that we get men in power to sign on to engage other men to do this work. We've also done work where, well, in a separate section, I've done work called Men Talk, where we train men to become feminist informed and teach them how to challenge conflict that they experience among themselves, and this is specific to how we deal with GBV within the region. Issues around mental health, how it is that they can support each other and encourage therapy as something that is not feminized, but something that we all need to survive and to live better lives. And of course, how is it that men can hold each other accountable when it comes to violence against women?
So we use a methodology which is called collective action learning, in which organizations go through 5 stages of learning, in which they start by observing the issue, assessing the issue, designing the issue, implementing a solution, and finally we capture the process. So next slide. So why gender intersectionality? Why not? It is a fantastic topic, but we actually had evidence to back up why we needed to talk about that when it comes to youth participation. Before the Yield Hub, there was something called the Yield Project, which was a project that was in charge of finding what were the challenges for young people to engage in the field of youth participation and SRHR. One of the outcomes of this initial research was the Yield Project paper, which explains what are the challenges, but then there was also another document that was launched in which the researchers segregated information between men and women and young women, and found that the experiences that young women experience in the field of youth participation and SRHR were different than men. For example, young women were more were more danger of being harassed, for example, for the advocacy that they do in SRHR. They had less professional opportunities, their leadership opportunities, and usually it was mostly just passion than just a proper career in SRHR. So that's why we choose, next slide please. That's why we choose gender and the topic of intersectionality for our first action learning group. So we had 5 organizations who joined us for this first cycle, in which MenEngage was one of them, also Resident Development, Athena Network, the Kami Fund, and in Gender Health. And this topic, this first group that we assembled will focus on the topic of gender and intersectionality and SRHR and youth participation. So what are the linkages between all of these situations? The process, we had 5 stages, as I mentioned before. Next slide. The first one was observe. In this phase, the group tried to understand what were the challenges that were happening in the landscape of adolescents and youth, SRHR, and gender and intersectionality. And for example, they realized how deep this issue is of gender issue, and raised the discussion. People expressed also personal and professional experiences that they had in the field of youth participation and SRHR. For example, bullying in managerial and leadership positions linked to their gender, for example. So I have one quote here from Gender Health. We must be intentional, flexible, and transparent in our approach to inclusion. We want to increase awareness of how power influences access, control, and opportunities. So after the first stage, that was the first outcome that we had. Next slide. Then during the assess phase, each organization reflected on how this issue affects their work that they are doing. And in general, the consensus was that the question that they wanted to solve was how do we shift power structures within our institutions or organizations, within our partners as well, to be inclusive and ensure that young people in all their diversity are engaged, safe, and afforded equal opportunities to contribute to improving AYSRHR efforts. Next. Now, the design. In the design phase, each organization had a goal, a concrete goal, in which they will be implementing it later. But in general, the 5 organizations came with some high-level ideas, in which they include establishment of feminist instructors, leadership and implementation challenges, addressing them, and also addressing organizational and capacity challenge. For example, transparency in budget allocations for technology and connectivity, also engaging young people across all organizations, talking about governance, for example. So these were some of the high-level ideas that they had. Next slide.
One bit of advice that I have is to find something that you are passionate about. And this can be everything. For example, I studied physics, and then during my studies, I saw that 1 in 9 female students got raped. And then we thought, wow, that number is so high, we have to do something. We have to organize and mobilize. And we did this with a lot of young people that maybe had 1 or 2 hours a week, and we actually changed the law to make it consent-based. We did this also together with a lot of women, a lot of men, and I see now still that a lot of the people that we did this campaign with, they're still very active on these topics, and I see that they're making a lot of change. So I think my advice would be to find the thing that makes your heart beat faster and start locally.
My advice for young people would be like, look for spaces around you. And if those spaces are not there, you can create your own spaces. You can find solutions, because change starts in our inner circle, and then we can get collective action, collective transformation. And we can really change the world if we want, but together, collectively.
My advice to the youth would be do the work. Whatever that looks like for you, do it. We can't actively change the world around us without being a part of the change. And we might not see the change in this generation or 2 generations to come, but I promise you, every single action that you take now is important. So how do we do that? Go learn what gender actually means. Go take a course on feminism. Put a TikTok search in or a YouTube search in on what climate justice activists have been doing. Learn about social media feminism, right? And tell your family to teach your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, your best friends, and also hold men accountable around you, especially young boys and men. You know, if you see a friend doing something that you do not approve of or like, call them out. Don't be afraid to do that. We do this work because we want to live in a better world, and if we want to do that, we have to be a part of the change.